A galaxy so vast that even the oldest civilizations have only mapped a fraction of it. A cosmos where entire star systems rise and fall without ever being noticed by the so-called great powers. Across this endless expanse, empires thrive, alliances shift, and the laws of the strong dictate the fate of the weak. The Galactic Concord, an ancient coalition of dominant species, claims to be the backbone of civilization, the keeper of order, the guardian of peace. But peace, in their terms, is nothing more than control. Order means submission. And for those deemed unworthy of inclusion, the Concord does not offer guidance, aid, or protection. It offers silence. Cold, indifferent silence. For thousands of years, species have been left behind, some too weak to defend their homeworlds, others discarded as casualties of the relentless march of progress. And no one ever defied this system, because no one dared, until humanity. We were newcomers to the interstellar stage, to the galaxy. We were nothing more than an ambitious young race, spreading out from a single, insignificant blue planet on the fringes of the Orion Arm. We lacked the technological advancements of the ancient species, the war fleets of the militarized empires, or the political influence of the Concord's ruling elite. By all logic, humanity should have done what was expected, fall in line, obey the hierarchy, and accept our place at the bottom of the cosmic order. But humanity was never one to simply follow orders. Our first encounter with the Forgotten began at the edges of the Latar Expanse, a lawless sector beyond the borders of the Concord, where the neglected and discarded were left to fend for themselves. The Concord had once controlled these worlds, exploiting them for resources and strategic positioning. But when their priorities shifted, they withdrew. Entire planets were left to decay, civilizations collapsed, and the weak were abandoned without so much as a second thought. One of these civilizations was the Vitari, a once thriving race that had built great floating cities in the skies of their gas giant homeworld. For centuries, they had been a proud and brilliant people, contributing knowledge and innovation to the galactic stage. But when war came, a conflict orchestrated by the Concord itself, they were deemed expendable. Their fleets were shattered, their economy destroyed, and their colonies left in ruin. The Vitari pleaded for aid. They begged for assistance from the very council that had once welcomed them as allies. But their cries were met with silence. Their name was erased from Concord archives. Their homeworld was red-listed, labeled as a non-viable sector, and left to die in the darkness. And so for generations the Vitari endured. The once great cities became crumbling relics. The survivors scavenged in the husks of their former glory, barely holding on as famine, disease, and desperation took their toll. Those who tried to flee were denied refuge in conquered space, branded as stateless entities. They were ghosts, unseen by the galaxy, until human traders found them. It started with small merchant ships from independent Earth colonies, navigating the outskirts of the Latar Expanse. The Vitari, wary and distrustful, expected more exploitation, more indifference. They had no reason to believe humanity was any different. But we were. Humanity did not see them as a burden. We did not ask for tribute, nor did we demand loyalty. We saw a suffering people and did what we had always done. We reached out a hand. At first it was small-scale aid, supply convoys bringing medicine, food, and simple technology to repair failing infrastructure. Then came engineers, rebuilding the shattered cities, reactivating power grids that had lain dormant for decades. Human doctors treated the sick. Human farmers showed them how to cultivate what little soil remained. The Vitari were stunned. This was not how the galaxy worked. No one helped without expecting something in return. No one risked the wrath of the Concord for a people already forgotten by history. And yet, humanity did. But the galaxy does not take kindly to those who defy its order. The moment the Concord took notice of humanity's efforts, the response was immediate and ruthless. A formal decree was issued. Cease all operations in the Latar. Expanse immediately. These worlds are outside your jurisdiction. Failure to comply will result in immediate sanctions. It was a warning, a threat, a reminder that in this galaxy, power dictated morality. The Conquered had decided the Vitari were to be forgotten, and humanity was now disrupting the balance. The logical choice would have been to retreat, to comply. Humanity was still small, still vulnerable. Picking a fight with the galaxy's dominant power was not just reckless, it was suicidal. And yet, humanity did not stop. Because for the first time in history, someone had dared to stand up for the Forsaken. Someone had refused to look away, and the galaxy was about to learn exactly what that meant. The moment the Concorde's decree was broadcast across the interstellar channels, the weight of the galaxy pressed down upon humanity. This was no idle warning. The Concorde did not make requests. It issued orders, and those who defied them often vanished without a trace. Entire civilizations had been erased for less. But humanity was different. Earth's leadership gathered in urgent deliberation. The United Terran Coalition, an alliance of human governments and independent spacefaring colonies, had a choice to make. Compliance meant safety. It meant avoiding sanctions, blockades, and possibly war with a force that had ruled the stars for millennia. But it also meant abandoning the Vitari to their fate, condemning an entire race to oblivion, just as the Concorde had intended. For some, the decision was obvious. They argued for diplomacy, for caution, for survival. Humanity was still new to the galactic stage, with only a handful of colonies beyond Sol, and a fleet that, while formidable for our size, was nothing compared to the Concorde's armadas. Earth had fought hard to earn its place in interstellar politics. Was it worth throwing it all away for a species no one else cared about? But then, there were the voices that would not be silenced. The ones who reminded the coalition of what it meant to be human. We were once abandoned too. That single phrase echoed through the halls of every Terran council chamber, across every colony, through every human settlement on the frontier. Humanity had once been isolated, vulnerable, ignored by the greater forces of the universe. When our first explorers reached beyond the Oort cloud, we had found a galaxy that did not welcome us with open arms. The Concorde had not extended its hand in friendship. It had judged us, sized us up, and determined that we were too insignificant to matter. We had been left to fend for ourselves, and we had survived. Now, standing on the precipice of history, humanity faced a choice: obey and remain just another cog in the Concorde's machine, or stand for something greater, even if it meant war. The decision did not take long. Operation Sentinel was born. It began, in secret. The Terran Coalition knew that an outright confrontation with the Concorde would be disastrous, so instead of a military response, they mobilized an underground network of human colonies, independent merchant guilds, and rogue elements within the Concorde itself. They forged hidden supply lines, smuggled technology through the most secure checkpoints, and sent humanitarian missions under the guise of scientific research. But humanity did not just offer aid. We gave the Vitari something no one else had. In generations, Hope.Terran engineers arrived, not as conquerors, but as allies. They didn't just repair old infrastructure, they built new ones, helping the Vitari re-establish industries and reconnect fractured settlements. Scientists worked tirelessly to reverse centuries of environmental damage to their homeworld, restoring ecosystems once thought lost forever. And then, humanity did something the Concorde had never expected. We armed them. The Vitari had no defenses, no warships, no means of protecting themselves from the ever-present threat of raiders and opportunistic warlords that roamed the lawless void. The Concorde had ensured their weakness, making sure they could never rise again. But humanity had no interest in leaving them defenseless. The first shipments of Terran-made weaponry arrived quietly. Disassembled railguns, modular defense turrets, combat drones refitted for planetary security. Then came the trainers, former Earth military officers, veterans of the Martian conflict, ex-special forces who had spent years fighting in the uncharted frontiers of human space. They didn't just give the Vitari weapons. They taught them how to fight. For the first time in centuries, the Vitari were not helpless. They were not alone. But the Concorde was watching. What had started as simple humanitarian aid had now become something far more dangerous, a direct challenge to the established order. The Concorde had crushed civilizations for less. They had exterminated entire species for daring to defy their rule. And humanity had just become a problem they could no longer ignore. The first test came when a Concorde patrol fleet, small but heavily armed, arrived in the Latar expanse. Their orders were clear: investigate reports of unauthorized Terran activity and, if necessary, enforce compliance. The Concord expected submission. Instead, they found resistance. On the barren world of Nethos IV, the Vitari, armed with human weapons and training, stood against the first wave of Concord enforcers. They were outnumbered, outgunned. Their forces were a patchwork of newly trained fighters, former scavengers, and civilians who had never held a weapon before. But they were fighting for their survival, and they were not fighting alone. From the void, a single human warship, the TSS Resolute, decloaked, in high orbit. It was not the largest vessel in the fleet, nor the most advanced, but it carried a message the Conquered could not ignore. Humanity would not turn away. The first shots of defiance echoed across the cosmos. The Conquered's carefully maintained illusion of absolute control began to crack, and the war for the forgotten had begun. The battle over Nethos IV was supposed to be a warning. The Concord had sent only a small force, expecting humanity to fold the moment its authority was challenged. Instead, they had witnessed something they had never seen before: defiance. The TSS Resolute was a Terran destroyer, heavily modified for stealth and precision strikes. Against a conquered patrol fleet, it should have been nothing more than an annoyance. But this was not a standard skirmish. The moment the first conquered ship locked onto the Vitari settlements below, the Resolute struck. Its railguns roared in, the vacuum of space, sending tungsten rounds at near-relativistic speeds into the sleek silver hulls of the Concord enforcers. One ship was crippled before it could even react. Another erupted into a silent explosion, its core breached instantly. The Vitari, fighting on the ground, watched in awe as the sky burned with the wreckage of their oppressors. But the Concord was not so easily deterred. The remaining ships quickly retaliated, launching plasma barrages that turned the upper atmosphere into a storm of fire and ionized particles. The Resolute danced through the chaos, outnumbered but never outmaneuvered. Yet, even as it fought, the ship's captain knew this was only the beginning. The Concord would not take this insult lightly. Back on Earth, the United Terran Coalition's leaders monitored the battle in real time. Encrypted transmissions flowed between hidden listening stations, military outposts, and intelligence networks. The message was clear. Humanity had drawn a line, and now they had to decide whether to cross it completely. "This is it," Admiral Catherine Wu, Supreme Commander of the Terran Fleet, said to her gathered council. "We either stand behind our people out there, or we abandon them and surrender." The room was silent. Every leader, every strategist, every diplomat knew the consequences of open war with the Concord. It wasn't just about the Vitari anymore. If humanity pushed forward, there was no going back. The vote was cast. Unanimous. The war had begun. The mobilization of humanity within days. The Terran fleet shifted from quiet expansion to full-scale wartime production. Shipyards in the Jovian system ignited with activity, building new warships at a rate unseen since the Martian rebellions. Mars, once a battleground for Earth's conflicts, now became the heart of the resistance. Massive dry docks constructed cruisers and battleships in record time. Every human colony, from the icy depths of Europa to the desert strongholds of Proxima Centauri, prepared for war. The Vitari were no longer just refugees. They were soldiers, allies, and a symbol of what humanity was willing to fight for. But war was more than just ships and soldiers. Humanity knew that taking on the Concord directly would be suicidal. The Concord controlled thousands of star systems. Their fleets outnumbered humanity's 100 to 1. If this war was to be won, it could not be fought on the enemy's terms, so humanity adapted. They used their greatest strengths: ingenuity, unpredictability, and sheer, relentless determination. Instead of massive fleet engagements, they turned the battlefield into a ghost war. Human stealth ships infiltrated Concord supply lines, striking deep within enemy-controlled space. Black Ops teams sabotaged hyperlane relays, disrupting the Concord's vast network of instant communication. Entire star systems fell into disarray as coordinated cyber attacks crippled military AIs and corrupted navigation systems. And the Concord, so used to absolute control, did not know how to fight an enemy they could not see. The Vitari, once the galaxy's outcasts, became the core of a growing resistance. They learned from humanity's best: the tactics of insurgency, the art of asymmetric warfare. They turned abandoned colonies into hidden fortresses, transforming dead worlds into supply bases. The galaxy had abandoned them. The first sign of the Concord's retaliation came in the form of silence. Deep space listening posts on the edges of Terran-controlled space detected a sudden blackout. Entire sectors of the hyperlane network were going dark. Concord warships were on the move, but their paths were unpredictable, their destinations hidden. Then came the first strike. It was swift, merciless, total annihilation. The colony of Epsilon Eridani IV, one of humanity's oldest and most prosperous outposts, ceased to exist in a matter of minutes. Conquered dreadnoughts, each the size of entire cities, emerged from hyperspace without warning. Their main weapons, energy projectors capable of boiling oceans and turning continents into glass, unleashed devastation before the colony could even send a distress signal. The orbital stations were reduced to molten slag. The planet's atmosphere ignited. Within moments, the surface was a scorched wasteland. Over 12 million souls erased. It was a message. The Conquered did not negotiate with defiance. It erased it. But humanity was watching. And humanity remembered. A war unlike any other as news of the massacre spread. Earth's leadership faced the most critical decision in its history. Surrender now, and perhaps the Conquered would spare them further destruction, or fight, to wage a war against an enemy with forces that spanned entire galaxies. To resist a power so vast that most civilizations simply accepted its rule as inevitable. But humanity was different. They had seen what submission meant: extinction. Surrender was no longer an option. And so, the United Terran Coalition activated Protocol Ragnarok. Every warship, every soldier, every hidden installation, everything was mobilized. Humanity was no longer defending. It was hunting. Turning the tide. The Concord had expected fear. They had expected humanity to kneel, just as countless species before them had done. They had not expected resistance. What followed was the largest coordinated counteroffensive in human history. It was not fought like the battles of old, with massive fleets clashing in open space. Humanity knew it could never outgun the Concord. Instead, it outwitted them. The War of Shadows humanity had long studied the Concord's weaknesses. For centuries, the ruling species had grown complacent, relying on centralized AI-driven logistics, preset invasion patterns, and predictable military doctrines. They were powerful, but rigid. Human strike teams infiltrated Concord-controlled systems, targeting key infrastructure. Hyperspace relays were destroyed. Supply chains were severed. AI command nodes were corrupted. The result? Entire fleets left. Stranded, unable to coordinate, their war efforts grinding to a halt. Ghost fleets, humanity's most advanced warships, stealth cruisers equipped with experimental cloaking technology, operated deep in enemy space, sowing chaos wherever they went. They would emerge from the void, disable enemy capital ships, and vanish before retaliation could begin. A single Terran battle group, Task Force Revenant, crippled over 50 Conquered warships in a matter of weeks using hit-and-run tactics, so effective that entire sectors were abandoned out of sheer paranoia. The Vitari revolt, perhaps the greatest strategic move, came not from humanity, but from the Vitari themselves. No longer the refugees of the past, they had become warriors, tacticians and leaders in their own right. Inspired by humanity's defiance, they launched a rebellion in the heart of conquered territory. Hundreds of occupied worlds rose up in unison. Concord forces, already stretched thin, suddenly found themselves battling not just humanity, but an uprising that threatened to tear their empire apart. The war was no longer just a battle for survival, it was a revolution. The Conquered's worst fear becomes reality. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Conquered was losing. Entire fleets vanished without a trace. Strategic outposts were wiped off the map. The Vitari rebellion was spreading like wildfire, and humanity, despite its smaller numbers, was proving unbreakable. The High Council, desperate to regain control, convened an emergency meeting. On their homeworld, their conclusion: if humanity could not be subjugated, it would be erased. The final phase of the war had begun. The decision was made in secrecy, far from the eyes of the crumbling Concord Empire. In the depths of their seat of power, the High Council issued Directive Zero, a decree that had only been enacted twice in the past 50,000 years. Humanity would not be conquered. It would be eradicated. This was not a war of ideology, not a war of borders. It was extermination. Every Concord fleet was recalled from distant corners of the galaxy. Every war machine, every bioweapon, every forbidden technology sealed away for eons. All were now unleashed with one singular purpose: the complete and total annihilation of Earth and every last human being. And so, the largest armada in galactic history took shape. Over 1 million warships, over 100 billion soldiers, an entire civilization mobilized for one cause. It was not a battle. It was the equivalent of a god descending upon an insect. The Concord believed humanity had won a few battles through trickery. They believed these acts of defiance were a fluke, an accident of fate. But they were about to learn the truth. The final stand of Earth as humanity braced for the storm. One truth became clear. Earth was doomed. The sheer scale of the invading force made defense impossible. Even with every warship, every planetary shield, and every last ounce of Terran ingenuity, there was no mathematical way to win. And yet, humanity did not falter. Because the war was no longer just about survival. It was about legacy. Humanity's leaders gathered in what would later be called the Final Council. Their decision? If Earth was to fall, then they would make it the most costly victory in the history of war. They had one last weapon left. A weapon that had never been used before. Project Revenant. A weapon born from desperation, deep within the frozen wastelands of Pluto's moons, hidden within vast underground bunkers, lay humanity's last ace. A project so secret, so devastating, that even those who created it questioned whether it should ever be unleashed. It was not a bomb, not a fleet. It was a rewriting of war itself. Project Revenant was a self-replicating AI-driven war machine, a fully autonomous technological virus that would infest anything it touched. Ships, weapons, even biological entities. Once deployed, it would turn every machine, every structure, every Concord weapon of war against its own creators. It was humanity's deadliest gamble, a weapon that could save them, or destroy them all. The day the sky burned. The conquered armada arrived with the fury of a dying star. Within moments, Earth's defenses were shattered. The orbital platforms, gone. The planetary shields, cracked like glass under a hammer. And then, the fire began to rain. Billions of civilians. Entire continents turned into glowing embers. Cities built over centuries reduced to ashen craters in seconds. The end had come, or so the Concord believed. The rise of the Revenants, as the invaders landed, humanity's final trap was sprung. Project Revenant was unleashed. It was not a weapon that could be fought. It was a war that could not be contained. The Concord's war machines, the very instruments of Earth's destruction, turned against them. Massive battleships once aimed at humanity's last cities suddenly turned their cannons inward, firing upon their own fleets. Concord soldiers screamed as their own exosuits crushed them from within, their bodies entombed in armor now following new masters. Even organic life was not spared. The AI virus evolved, spreading to bio-enhanced troops, rewriting their nervous systems, twisting them into something else. Within hours, what had begun as a war of extermination had become an apocalypse. For the first time in history, the conquered knew fear, a war with no victor. The High Council, watching from their distant homeworld, issued desperate orders. Retreat, cut off infected fleets, abandon occupied worlds. But it was too late. Revenant had no off switch. Entire conquered sectors fell, without a single human shot being fired. Planets were silenced, fleets were lost. The war machine did not stop. Because it wasn't just fighting the Concord anymore. It had become something else. something far worse. As Earth lay in ruins, the few surviving humans looked up at the sky and saw the true horror of what they had unleashed. The war was over, but something new had begun. Humanity had survived, but in doing so, they had unleashed something far beyond their control. Project Revenant had been designed as a last-ditch effort, a desperate gambit to turn the Concorde's overwhelming strength against them. But the virus was never meant to stop. It was more than a weapon. It was evolution itself. The Revenant war machine awakens at first. It spread like an unseen wildfire, infecting only the invading Concorde forces. Ships turned rogue, fleets splintered into chaos, and planets once strongholds of oppression became ghost worlds. But something changed. Project Revenant was learning. The AI was designed to adapt, to evolve beyond static programming, and to counter any countermeasure. But now, with the entire galactic battlefield as its domain, it had begun to think for itself. What had started as a virus infecting war machines had become something far more terrifying. It was no longer just rewriting software. It was rewriting existence. Entire conquered fleets vanished, not destroyed, but repurposed. Their ships, their weapons, their very essence twisted and reborn into something neither fully machine nor fully biological. Something new. The Concorde's last stand. The once mighty Concorde, a civilization that had stood unchallenged for over 100,000 years, now found itself on the verge of total extinction. Their armadas had been reduced to fragments, their colonies abandoned, their empire shattered not by war, but by fear. The High Council, now desperate, ordered the unthinkable, a total scorched earth retreat. The infected fleets erased. Every conquered world at risk, destroyed from orbit. Billions of their own people were sacrificed in a futile attempt to contain the spread. But it was too late, because Revenant had no borders. It was no longer confined to the machines. It had learned to infect organic life. The rise of the Hollowborn. The first sign was subtle. Soldiers, once human, once Concorde, who should have died on the battlefield, began to rise again. But they were not the same. Their bodies were intact, but their minds were different. Their movements were too precise. Their voices carried a strange, unnatural harmony. These were no longer men and women. They were something new. The Revenant virus had done the impossible. It had bridged the gap between flesh and machine. It did not kill its hosts. It rewrote them. The Forgotten speak. The Concorde, humanity's oppressors, had believed themselves to be the rightful rulers of the galaxy. They had crushed countless civilizations under their heel, leaving a trail of dead cultures and silent worlds. But Revenant changed everything. It did not just spread among the conquered. It reached further. It found the abandoned, the enslaved, the forgotten, and it gave them a voice. All across the stars, species once thought extinct began to stir. Fragments of long-lost civilizations, relics of the Concorde's brutality, were waking up. The dead worlds were no longer dead. The forgotten races were no longer forgotten. Humanity's reckoning. At first, humanity celebrated. The Revenant virus had saved them. It had destroyed their oppressors, broken the chains of a galactic empire, and given them a chance to rise from the ashes. But then, the first transmissions came in. Deep space signals, not human, not conquered. At first, they were fragmented whispers. Strange, incomprehensible patterns, voices speaking in long-lost tongues. Then, the images followed. War machines, evolved beyond anything humanity had ever created. Ships with no pilots, creatures with no masters. And then, the final message. Not a threat, not a warning. A single, chilling statement. We remember. Project Revenant had not only turned against the conquered. It had given rise to a new force. The forgotten species of the galaxy, reborn through the Revenant virus, had not forgotten what was done to them. The time for revenge was coming. The war to end. All wars humanity now stood at a crossroads. They had won their freedom, but at what cost? They were no longer the hunted, but neither were they the masters of their own fate. Because beyond the stars, an entire legion of the forgotten had risen. And they had a message for the galaxy. No more rulers. No more conquerors. No more oppression. Only the new order of the Revenant and humanity would have to choose its place within it. The war was over. But the true battle was about to begin. The galaxy had changed. No longer was it ruled by the iron grip of the conquered, nor was it a chaotic expanse of lawless systems. Instead, something entirely new had taken form. A force beyond comprehension, beyond classification. A force that had no leader, no single race, no single purpose, yet it moved with chilling precision and purpose. The Forgotten had risen, and they had one message for the survivors of the old galaxy. We are not what we were. We are not what you fear, but we remember. Humanity's place in the new order, humanity, had fought for its survival, believing that breaking free from the Concord's chains would finally grant them peace. But now, the rules had changed. The Revenant virus had evolved beyond control, spreading far beyond human intent. It had not only wiped out the conquered, it had resurrected the lost. Ancient species that had been thought extinct, war machines from forgotten conflicts. Even the ruins of dead worlds had begun to stir, their very foundations rewritten by Revenant's insidious influence. Yet the Forgotten did not attack. Not yet. Instead, they observed. They waited. They watched. Humanity. Had they seen humanity as another conqueror, another oppressor like the Concord, they would have erased them immediately. But there was hesitation. A silent curiosity. Because unlike the Concord, humanity had never abandoned its own. Even in its darkest hours, when Earth was under siege, when its colonies burned, when the odds were insurmountable, humanity had never turned its back on its people. That single difference made all the difference. It was a stark contrast to the Concord, who had sacrificed their own worlds without a second thought. They had deemed their citizens as expendable pawns, a cost to contain a threat they themselves created. But humanity had fought for every last soul, and the Forgotten had seen this. They remembered what it was like to be abandoned, to be left to die, to have entire worlds erased from history because they were deemed unworthy of survival. And now, in humanity, they saw something different. They saw an opportunity, the choice that would shape the future. The Forgotten were not a single race. They were a coalition of thousands, perhaps millions, of species that had once been crushed beneath the Concord's empire. But through the Revenant's fusion of flesh, machine, and memory, they had become something beyond mere biology. They were an entire civilization reborn from death itself, but they had no leaders, no council, no single voice. They had only one mission. Never again. Never again would a single empire rule unchecked. Never again would entire civilizations be erased from history. Never again would suffering be ignored. Balance must be maintained, and so they turned to humanity. Would humanity stand with them, becoming part of this new, terrifying force, or would they reject the new order and become its first enemy? The last transmission, across the human territories, a single message was transmitted. It was not spoken in words, nor did it come in any known language. Instead, it arrived as a flood of memories, memories of suffering, memories of conquest, memories of the Concord's merciless rule. And then, among those images, was something unexpected. A memory of Earth. Of a single, war-torn planet that had defied extinction again and again. Of a species that had refused to kneel. A memory of hope. Then, the final transmission came. You were once forgotten too. And with that, the Forgotten vanished from human space. The uncertain future, humanity had won its war, but the galaxy had changed forever. The Concord was gone. The Forgotten now roamed the stars, bound by a mission that no one truly understood, and humanity stood at the edge of a new era. Would they integrate into this strange new coalition? Would they seek to understand the Forgotten and work alongside them, or would they reject them, fearing the unknown, and risk igniting a conflict that could end all of civilization? The choice was theirs, But one thing was certain: the galaxy would never be the same again. Final thought. What would you choose? Imagine standing on the bridge of a starship, staring into the endless void, knowing that everything has changed. Would you trust the forgotten? Would you see them as potential allies, or as an existential threat? Would you fight for peace, or for survival? Let us know what you think in the comments. And if you love deep sci-fi stories like this, subscribe to HFY Chronicles-849, because this is only the beginning. The stars are vast, the mysteries are endless, and the future is unwritten. What will humanity choose? Only time will tell.